Alright, glorious. So, for those of you who missed out on what we were doing last time, we were working on creating a new setting. We had the very first session last time, where we set the basic parameters, particularly in terms of magic and the role of magic in the world. Now, there are a couple of things that I think we should do next, because my ultimate goal is to create a timeline of the different nations around the world, the different races, when they sprang up, how they sprang up, what their origins are, that type of thing. And then from there we can basically track throughout time the rise and fall of the different factions and coming up with a ending or starting scenario. So what I am thinking right now is I want to come up with a couple of ideas. So first of all, geographical disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, supervolcanoes, stuff like that. And the reason for this is many of those will have a role to play in the fall of the ancient nations. We should also come up with like the origins of various different races. So for example, the humans, gnomes and elves in this setting are all going to be interrelated. There's going to be a progenitor race to those three. Then thing happens, those three basically split off. Are gods monsters sleeping under the mountains causing eruptions when they wake? Well, one of the things with the gods is they are intricately linked to the world. So if a god runs out of worshippers, and it is worshippers that charge their power, then they slumber. So it's kind of like the treants in Tolkien, where treants who get very, very old fall asleep and basically become trees. It's like that with the gods. So the very, very ancient, forgotten gods basically start slumbering in the world, and that is the source of the magic. Basically, fragments of their being start to flake off and become magical energy that casters can then use. So magic is divine and divinity is magic. Like, the two are intricately linked. So magic is dead gods. Yeah, effectively. Which races are native to the world? Which are the oldest? So this is one of the areas that I wanted to talk about. So I got here origins, just noted down a couple of basic bits. So we got the humans, elves and gnomes, which I have said were going to be related. We got the dragons, dragonborn, kobolds, which I think should be related. We've got orcs, we've got hobgoblins. What am I missing? We're missing halflings. We're missing half elves, half orcs, dwarves, of course. Trolls. I'm trying to take this from the perspective of the so-called playable races. So at the moment, like, one of the ones that's maybe playable, but I haven't really decided, goblins. Because we've got orcs, we've got hobgoblins. What about goblins? Not sure about that. And then there's another custom race, which I call the Roshan, which I want to introduce. Dragonborn are related to dragons. So, of the ancient races, I would say that the ancient races are probably those three. Humans, elves, gnomes, dragons, dragonborn, kobolds, dwarves. What's furbolgs? Furbolgs are a bit more advanced. I kind of want to stick with the basic ones. And then the ones that appear eventually would be... probably the next wave would be those three. So, why humans, elves and gnomes related? So, one of the things that I want to do, and I'm not stealing this from Ambernar, this is actually an idea I had far before that, and it does have a different effect, but there is a big magical accident. Whether it's... in fact, it's probably the death of one of the gods. And what effectively happens is the precursor to the humans, elves and gnomes were in this region. And then when the god dies, there's a massive magical explosion. And what that effectively does is anyone who is near the source or near the center of this explosion, all of the magic is burned out of them. Those are the humans. Humans can still learn magic, they can still have like magical bloodlines, but they themselves are not a magical race. Then you had the ones who were on the outskirts of where this explosion happened. Those are the elves. They still have some latent magical ability, but that's about it. And then we have the gnomes. Actually, the gnomes are probably the ones that were the closest to the explosion. So you have the gnomes in the center, then the humans, then the elves. And the gnomes were hit so hard by this, they were basically forced underground. This is where the rock gnomes come from. Then the rock gnomes had to kind of live with the very dangerous levels of magical energy that were around them, and that's how they formed the magical resistance. Plus they can still do magic themselves because it was not burned out of them. That's where the gnomes are from. Are goblins in this setting just feral hobgoblins, or are hobgoblins just civilized goblins? I don't know. So one thing which I really do want to do with the hobgoblins is they are very much one of the civilized races. They're up there with the humans, the elves, the dwarves, etc. Because I always feel it really weird that they're considered monstrous when clearly they're not. They have real organization, they have real hierarchies and things like that. So I very much feel like that the hobgoblins would be there, and I think that the hobgoblins would be somewhat similar end goal here. Something a bit similar to the Italian city-states. There are independent states of hobgoblins that are constantly fighting each other. And that's where the hobgoblins get their martial society. They're constantly, they'll be like the Greek city-states, probably more, actually. So they're constantly fighting against each other, but their wars are non-lethal. They're kind of like the mercenaries. They'll go to war, they'll fight, and they'll basically say, right, you guys fought harder, you win, whatever it is we're fighting over, everyone goes home. Except the hobgoblin clergy can show up to one of these battles and say, this is now a blood war. And then it's to the death. And that's where hobgoblins get their martial edge, because it happened at one stage that the hobgoblins got so lax about actually killing stuff that they almost got wiped out. So they're very good at fighting, they're very well organized, but they're so used to not landing that killing blow that they don't actually kill anything. Almost wiped out. Then the clergy basically rose up and said, right, we need to hone these skills. So to lend that edge of danger, which is so required to have a proper warrior culture, if their clergy show up and declare this to be a blood war, then all holds are off. It's to the death. And that's kind of the role that I see with the hobgoblins. And I wouldn't actually be that surprised if the Renaissance originated with the hobgoblins. I kind of like that as well. They're the kind of surprise race. My headcanon now is hobgoblins are the hot-headed Italian stereotype. So orcs. I don't know where orcs are from. Halflings, I don't know where the halflings are from. That's still to be determined. But this is all quote-unquote modern history. The ancient history is these guys. So the humans, the elves, and the gnomes, that's pretty much, I'm set on that. When I order something like the gnomes, elves, humans make the most sense considering their looks. Well, remember they're all derived from one race, so there's the precursor, which then leads to those three. Not one leads to one leads to one. It splits into three. About the dwarves, could you add some form of toxic fallout after it and could explain the dwarven biology resistant to magic? They didn't lose magical abilities, they instead adapted to control the magic to natural resilience so that they could survive. Yes, except dwarves aren't magic resistant in 5th edition. Gnomes are. Dwarves are poison resistant. And yeah, we do need to form the geography at some point. Part of this exercise is to decide who started near who, and then we can go from there. So I really like the idea that dragons were one of the ancient races. The precursors of the dragons probably fought. Precursors could be giants, except giants is kind of a cliche, the giant dragon wars. Yeah, I'd like to get away from that. I like giants though, giants are interesting. But I think the giants should be kind of a race apart from these guys. I don't want an Underdark. I actually detest the Underdark as an idea. It's one of my least favourite things. So if there is an Underdark, it's basically just a hollow mountain range or something. Likewise with the Feywild and the Shadow Realm. They're probably not a separate plane of existence. They're probably just a really, really big forest that has magic. Dragons should have a natural enemy. I don't disagree. So one of the things that came with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is the fact that dragons could actually be creators of Dragonborn. They could give Dragonborn, or rather they could give other races draconic traits, and that's what turns them into Dragonborn. I kind of like that idea, where dragons are kind of still a semi-mythical divine race. Like, these would basically be the demigods. And then any mortals that they particularly like, they then turn into Dragonborn. But I do want Dragonborn to be more numerous than just like 5 people, because they're awesome. Dragons and Dragonborn versus Dwarves. Now that's interesting. Could dragons be the first gods? I would say that some of the gods are definitely dragons. Like, I really like Bahamut and Tiamat. I'm not saying we'll necessarily have those gods in our universe, because I would quite like to make our own. But draconic gods for sure. And it could even be that the so-called legendary dragons are the draconic gods. See the dragons being awe-inspiring to all of the races, but over time the other races make their own gods, like worshipping ancestors. That's interesting. Like, I think the earliest Dragonborn would have been other races that were turned into Dragonborn, then after that they just kind of continued. And I would say the dragons still have that ability to create Dragonborn. And probably kobolds too, although kobolds would be a whole other thing. Kind of tempted to make kobolds a bit like hobgoblins. They're one of those races that are just kind of always there. Or orcs. Or goblins. What about dragon bloodline humans being the ruling class? I'd rather that were dependent on different cultures for who the ruling classes are. Because one of the things I really like about what the magic is divine, divinity is magic system that we have is some cultures could see magic as sacred. So only the clergy can use it. Whereas some other cultures might be like, magic's magic, it's everywhere. Magic's the great equalizer, anyone can use it if they're taught. Or it could be just the purview of the rich, so you don't really have bloodlines. Or if you do have bloodlines, then they would be outcast. Or they'd be Goatball, probably. For the dwarves, could the magic dust have animated the earth in some freak thing at the beginning of time? I was actually kind of thinking that's what the Roshan are. So the Roshan are a race that I came up with, which is kind of a step in for the Warforged, but they're not artificial. They're more like earth elementals. And what the Roshan are is basically magic which has been corrupted and then got the spark of life. If that makes sense. So the blood of the Roshan is basically... What do we call it? We called it prime something. Prim something. What did we call it? Oh, whoops, did that save? Yes. In the beginning, magic. Primessence, that's the one. Because magic is corruptible. I quite like the idea that dwarves and giants are related. Because I always see, like, culturally, dwarves and giant culture is kind of similar. So maybe in the same way that dragons and dragonborn are related, so are dwarves and giants. Which would again kind of put giants as the protagonist against, or the antagonist against the dragons. Yeah, Macho, that's again, like, more detailed. We're still talking super high level. Because there will definitely be groups that do that. Dwarves are the cursed descendants of a giant people. Cursed how? Because I do kind of see dwarves as being mini giants. Miniature gigantic space giants. I need to see what the precise traits of dwarves again are. I haven't played one for ages. I know it's poison. What is their relation to magic? Because it definitely used to be that they had resistances, but they don't anymore. Oh, tieflings. We forgot tieflings. Dark vision, resilience, which is the poison thing, dwarven combat training, tool proficiency, stone cunning, toughness, armor training. So yeah, no magic. Make the Roshan and the dragons the enemies. See, the Roshan I think would be a more recent race. Because part of the thing with the Roshan is that nobody knows where they came from. There's basically a giant wasteland somewhere. And they just emerge from this wasteland from time to time. No memory, no idea of who they are or where they are. Which means that they are very imprintable. So wherever they end up being is basically what they'll assimilate into. Oh yeah, we have Goliaths too, it's true. So Goliaths and Goliaths are definitely going to be related to giants. And tiefling. So infernal and abyssal stuff, that's a thing for another time. I'm less interested in that. So tieflings may not even exist in this setting. So yeah, we could have giants, dwarves, and Goliaths. I could definitely see that being related. And then I guess we kind of have to put... Orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins. Where did they come from? Biggest question, halflings. I kind of feel that halflings are a bit like the kobolds. They're just kind of always there. Did the giant, dwarf, and Goliath lineage arise from extraplanetary divine? Don't know yet. No, those are different. So these are 4 different progenitors. The only one that's kind of the question mark and that died out are the precursors. The others, the dragons, the giants, and the question mark. I mean, this could be another question mark precursor. I remember in Heroes of Might and Magic making them like fantasy Mongol steppe people. Maybe giving the orcs an Eastern Asia flavour would be interesting. There's other games that do that as well. Like Hobgoblins and Warhammer are like Mongol steppe people. Last time you talked about the gods having waged war against each other almost to a point where things went to an end and then agreed to take a step back for it not to happen again. Could the orcs, goblins and such be races made by the gods for that war? I don't want the gods to be too overtly related to the world. I want to just say, oh yeah, the orcs were made by the god of orcs, because that just is easy to put in. I kind of want the gods to be fighting the wars themselves. And any relation they have to the different races is almost by accident. Like, races might have a racial god, but it's not necessarily... It's they who create the god, not the other way around. And I definitely don't want orcs to just be like, oh, these were once elves that got corrupted. No. We can do better with that. Maybe orcs and goblins led to hobgoblins. Maybe hobgoblins are just another word for half-orcs. Because I don't really want the orcs to just be, oh, they're the bad guys because they're orcs. I actually kind of prefer the way that, for example, the orcs in Warcraft are handled. Where they could actually be from a different world or something. I mean, we could even have... Same precursor. Nah, I don't like that. I like how neat it is that this precursor is the progenitor of the humans, the elves, and the gnomes. Yeah, Lord of the Rings orcs are bred from primary races. I don't want to go that path. Would we want to make half-orcs related to orcs goblins instead of orcs humans? Possibly. I mean, that's kind of why I put a question mark with the half-orcs. Because I kind of like the idea that hobgoblins are a more mature greenskin, if that makes sense. But also I don't particularly want to say, oh, in that case the orcs are tribal. Like, I like the idea that the orcs have maybe some earlier realm. It's just that the hobgoblins have adapted to modern world better. So whereas the hobgoblins almost got wiped out, maybe the orcs pretty much did. by whatever it was that attacked. I actually quite like that. So we're still going to say this, but orcs, goblins virtually wiped out when attacked. Hobgoblins survived due to their clergy and the blood wars. No, see, but the magical disaster is their relation to magic, and I don't think there's any real difference in the relation to magic between orcs and hobgoblins. That, to me, feels more societal. I mean, they could definitely be from a different continent. Absolutely, they could. Except for the fact that orcs and goblins are a pretty nice early threat in Dungeons and Dragons. Well, they could just be like effectively a native form of wildlife that is a bit more civilized, but I don't really like that. Some sort of colonial thessalocracy would be interesting. That's probably actually the gnomes. I can see the gnomes being maritime. Because of all of these races, I definitely see the gnomes as the most tech savvy, and I could kind of see the gnomes being the most eager explorers, maybe urged on by humans and elves. Because I still think that these three are like intricately linked. Like they've evolved enough over time that they are very different, but now that things are kind of settled down and become a lot safer, they are near each other. Like they have the same ancestor. It could well be that I kind of like that the orcs, whatever the progenitor of the orcs was. No, never mind. So I think I'm going to go back to the thing. The dwarves, the dragons and the giants probably did fight, and then virtually wiped themselves out in the process. I don't like the idea that the giants had this crazy global spanning empire that was one of the great lost empires. I don't like that very much. I think that it's just going to be like early wars between near mythical creatures. Like cloud giants. And then from there they kind of devolved. Idea for the magical disaster was the dead of the orcs and the goblin god who was linked to the element of earth. Cataclysm turned other races against them, and a few hundred years later came the race of the Roshanik being linked to the death of the orcs and the goblin god. Will there be something super advanced like Zep in your campaign? No. Like, I must admit, I actually really like what Ambanar has done, where the start of the setting is 1444. So I think, not because it's related to Europa Universalis, but because it's just a time period I myself am interested in, like the start date is going to be roughly the technology of 1444. Very early gunpowder, but it's still pretty rare. Maybe only in like 1 or 2 areas. How would a divine global empire even be able to be administered? Yeah, exactly. I mean, on the one hand, we kind of need the dragons and the giants to be super powerful. I actually kind of like the idea that the giants and the dragons were semi-mythical. And then maybe there was a fall from grace somehow. Maybe they were more intricately linked to the divine. Maybe dragons and giants were the ones who were fighting the war of the gods, for the gods. Plus whatever the orcs precursor is. So maybe we have the human precursor, dragons, giants, and the lost. Do we want aquatic races in the setting? Yes, but I don't think necessarily in this region. No, Sarhuagin or Marnids. I want to keep it just to being on land. Like, one of the things that I would like is for a new world to be just about to be discovered, but that honestly can be an area that somebody else can flesh out rather than me. As in one of the other dragons, if they want to. Perhaps the orcs came from Macedonia-like place, big successful campaign, scattered populations across the map. Oh, now that's interesting. I actually kind of like that, yeah. So rather than having a precursor, all were part of a large war host, which fragmented, scattering elements all over the world. And maybe it just happened that the hobgoblins were more centralized, because they're better organized. I actually like that. That's good. So orcs, goblins, hobgoblins will be somebody who arrives later. So maybe if we see this from the perspective of we are India, and then Alexander the Great arrives and then dies, leaving scattered groups of these guys behind. Or the hobgoblins are the group that they all spread out from. I'm kind of okay with there being different races in the same area, with kind of an unexplained heritage between them. That's one of the mysteries that can be delved into later. I actually quite like that there's an outside force, because it lets us really mess things up at some point. So you remember at the start of today's session I was talking about, right, we need a set of disasters which can be used to shake the world up and change things. That invasion can be one of them. I usually don't like saying, okay, big invasion knocks everything out, but actually this answers a lot of questions. So in this instance it works. These are the Mongol hordes. These are Alexander the Great. They arrive, they fragment, they get displaced. Why they arrived in such numbers? Maybe it's a migration caused by another event. Like the Great Migrations at the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Orcs, the warriors, the hobgoblins, the command staff, the goblins, the engineers. I mean, there might be a loose setup like that, but I don't necessarily want to designate an entire race to a profession. They might have a proclivity towards a certain creative outlet, but I don't want them to say, right, goblins are the engineers. I mean, they might like making stuff, they might be a bit better at it than the others. But I don't want to just say, okay, this army arrives and the goblins were the engineers. I think it's just, they were one of the peoples of this army. Could have happened shortly after the disaster. No, I think that these guys will be much later. So, precursor, if we're talking timeline, we're going to have dragons versus giants. That's prehistory. And then we're going to have the precursors. And I would say that's probably, like, we're talking ancient Egypt here. And then we have the magical disaster. Which would be, in fact, this would be ancient Egypt. Yeah. this would be... Oh, what were they called? Sumerians. And then we have the rise of the three civilizations, which is humans, elves, and gnomes. Which would be roughly the equivalent to the Hittites, the Egyptians. See, the Magic Disaster is still even earlier. And the northern guys. There were like 3 major powers in the Bronze Age. Because that's what we're talking about here. I think it was Mycenae. Might have been. Assyrians, that was it. Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Hittite. Babylon was a bit too far away. And the Hittites were special because they had the best sources of tin outside of Britain. Is the magical disaster the War of the Gods, or is that separate? No, that's very separate. War of the Gods would be this. And even that, like, I do not want to emphasize War of the Gods. That's done too often in history to explain why things fragmented. It's not so much a War of the Gods as kind of, Divine Rules. No, Divine Covenant. Something like that. Which is what set the rules for divine interaction into the world. Why exactly that comes about doesn't matter right now. Magical disasters on a larger scale of Pompeii. Yeah, basically. The magical disaster, like, we're talking about supervolcano scale. Like the Ring of Fire, Indonesia. Yellowstone. Okay, so we have Rise of the Three Civilizations. Then we have the Orcs. But that's not going to be until, like, Iron Age. Maybe even later. Probably talking, maybe Fall of Rome type thing. They'd be like the Goths. And the Huns. Guess this will go into EU4. No. EU4 just because I like EU4 and playing Empanada. This is probably going to be a D&D campaign. But other things might spin off. I mean, I just wanted to create my own setting for years. And this is me just like bringing together a whole load of different ideas I had. Nothing to do with EU4. The only relation to EU4 is the music playing in the background. And the fact that the quote-unquote start year of the campaign would be 1444. Ish. It's not even necessarily 1444, it's just an interesting period in time. And then we have the This would be another invasion. So actually, yeah, so we basically have the Mongol invasion. Where we could introduce another of the playable races. Or another disaster. And the purpose of this would be when the Hobgoblins... Rise of the Hobgoblin Clergy. And that's when they get properly organised. Which is what, 12 something? Yeah, 1220s. Perfect. Perhaps the Orc Hobgoblin land could have been kept alive by Promescence deposited there after the disaster. Thousands of years later it's running out and the land is sinking beneath the sea. Oh, that's interesting. There, land sinking beneath the sea. Which would give ocean-bound explorers something to explore. Atlantis. Ooh, I like that actually. Okay, okay. So we could give the greenskins an affinity to the ocean. Maybe the orcs are the seafarers. And the goblins. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily link that to magic. But they're land sinking beneath the sea because of some other thing. Rising sea levels, whatever. Works for me. You know what? This invasion here could actually be the Dwarves. They come from a different region. Would it be like a sunset invasion or a flight from Atlantis? No, it'd be a flight from Atlantis. If we had Ice Ages instead of ice, it would be elemental. Ooh, I actually quite like that idea. Interesting. Let's put that down here. So we've got elemental, ages, natural phenomena. Probably linked to magic. Linked to imbalances in magic. So the fall of Atlantis linked to element of water. It's kind of cool. I like that. And that also means that the element of fire could well be the magical disaster. Because it is like, it has a lot of parallels to the volcano. So imagine you're a race of people kind of centered around a large central mountain range. And that mountain range goes boom. The ones who are nearest that volcano try to hide. They go underground. They try to get away from the lava flows. They bunker down, they hunker down. They become quite resistant to the effects of the volcano, because they're still living fairly near it. Those are the gnomes. Then you have the ones who are just outside of that area, who are close enough that any affinity they had to their mountains, gone. Any latent magical powers they had, gone. Those are the humans. And you have the ones which are a little bit further out, which might actually start absorbing some of the fallout. And it might actually enhance their powers a little bit more than what they once had. Those are the elves. So the elves are a magical race. The humans are a magic dormant race. And then the gnomes are a magic resistant race. I like the orcs being somewhat like the Polynesians, island-hopping seafaring. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I kind of like that as well. Give them like a Polynesian culture then. Makes them a heck of a lot more interesting. So we got humans, elves, gnomes, done. What about... we still haven't really done anything with these two. The dragons, giants war, the dragonborn and the dwarves. Because actually one of the things I do like the idea of is the dragonborn being one of the most ancient races. So maybe it's the arrival of the dragon kin. That's the second invasion, which the hobgoblins are the ones that are able to resist. And there, we could definitely have parallels to, like, Poland, Hungary, Austria fighting against the Ottomans being the Dragonborn, or the arrival of the Mongols being fought against Muscovy. Hobgoblins are a magical void race where the magics of the Dragonborn have little to no effect. Well, I was actually thinking, like, this would be... what would be... the Hobgoblins are kind of the frontier between the three civilizations, the Elves, Gnomes and Humans, and the Dragonborn. And the reason I say that is because I want the Hobgoblins to be virtually wiped out, maybe even migrate somewhere. In fact, I think it would make sense that they migrate away, kind of lick their wounds, go, okay, what the hell went wrong? We're this super martial race, we're supposed to be the frontiersmen, the martial lords, and yet we just got absolutely hammered. And then the clergy comes in, well, because you lost your edge. I know how to get your edge back. Nothing wrong with your martial culture, you just forgot how to kill. And it's then that the Hobgoblins basically get themselves reorganized and are the counterattack that eventually push the Dragonborn invasion. No, they wouldn't go that far. Maybe... how would that work? Probably, yeah. The Hobgoblins are like the Goths. They were beaten by the steppe peoples, precursors to the Huns. They then settled in northern Italy, rallied, and then later on it was the northern Italians, or Austrians, that fought back against, like, the Ottomans. It's that kind of thing, and probably on that kind of timescale. I'm not saying like 10 years later they turn around and beat them, no. It's like their ancestors, not their ancestors, their successors did it. Like, they don't need to be exact parallels in history. I know what I'm trying to say here. What if the dragons and the giants had a long peaceful relationship for eons, building great cities on floating islands? I don't really want to do floating islands. That always feels a bit weird. Unless floating islands are just another idea for like mountains. I mean, what we could do is have most of the world flooded. Then the mountaintops are the only places that are actually habitable, which are inhabited by the giants and the dragons. Sea levels fall, maybe because of an ice age or something. Gets packed into the north and south glaciers. Starts forming an actual atmosphere for the world. And then what were, to them, the cloud tops were actually just the mountain tops. Never been here for any of the world building. It's pretty cool. Thanks. I'm pretty pleased with how these go. It's really nice having this back and forth with chat, like throwing ideas around, because you guys do have some absolute gems from time to time. So the only race that we haven't really given a place for yet are the Dwarves and the Goliaths. So one thing that I want to get away from with the Dwarves is I don't want them to be subterranean. I want them to be surface. Sure, they can go underground. Sure, they can be good miners, particularly with their stone cunning kind of abilities, but to like live entirely underground, it's not feasible. You can't build an entire freaking city underground, especially not with the kind of technology these guys have. Like, look modern day, how difficult we find it with all of today's wonders of technology to tunnel. Just to build a simple tunnel. Now imagine trying to build an entire city underground. No. What's this world for? Whatever we want it to be for. Probably a D&D campaign at some point in the future. I just kind of fancied building a setting. Naval dwarves, maybe. Explorers probably makes the most sense. The other thing I don't really want to do with the dwarves is have them as a doomed civilization. If there are any doomed civilizations in... Oh, what's the word? Decline. Would be probably the Dragonborn. Because everyone and their dog does dwarves and elves being the civilizations in decline. They're not here. I would say the elves are probably stagnant. But I wouldn't say the dwarves are in decline. Dwarves could be more of a nomadic people offering themselves for hire and such for land for periods of time. I mean, I'm actually kind of thinking that the dwarves and the Goliaths should be like the Scandinavians. So they have basically no interaction with the world until like the 800s. And then something really pisses them off and they start attacking. Scandinavian dwarves feel generic to me, but it fits. Yeah. So there are a couple of things I do want to get away from. I don't think that they should be seafaring. I don't think they should be seafaring raiders. I'm actually kind of thinking the dwarves would be more like the Russians. They were kind of just so remote that nobody could really interact with them until everybody else expanded. And then they're the guys at the northern fringes. Fantasy Russians. I'm thinking more like Novgorod, but yeah, Kiev. So it's more like 900s. I'm going to make a note. Kievan Rus. So the Kievan Rus came mostly because they like plying rivers. I can see that. Rather than being deep sea travellers, which I think is going to be more of an orcish trait. I mean, that could be why the dwarves and the orcs started to clash. It's the orcs that kind of woke the dwarves up, so maybe some of the green screen invasion hit the northern kingdoms of the dwarves and the Goliaths, whereas the rest hit the southern kingdoms. And then, hot on their heels came the dragons. Goliaths being the Norse and the dwarves being Russians. Yeah, something like that. Again, I don't necessarily. I don't want the Goliaths to be sailors. Like, the people who I could see least likely to be sailors would be Goliaths. But I could definitely see them kind of hanging around in the northern mountains. Honestly, the Goliaths probably aren't hugely interested in what the others are doing. So probably not as important at this stage to flesh out as a cultural area. It's just kind of, these guys are in the north. If we need something to happen from the north, it can be the Goliaths. Suction Mallard and Fairtwitch, thank you very much for the follows. Welcome to the channel. And Fox Official wants me to drink some tea. Yaroslavl, thank you for the follow. People of a high plateau, isolated, hard to get to. In fact, like, the Goliaths could be kind of like the Mayans. Not the Mayans, the Incans. Heck, the Dwarves could be like the Incans. If there's any civilization that I could imagine being dwarf-like, it would be Incans. Maybe it's the Goliaths that start raiding stuff and the dwarves just stay around at home. Dwarves being like the Incan sounds pretty neat. Yeah, I very much get the impression that the dwarves would be in a northern mountain kingdom, and relations with them probably doesn't start until much later. Like, as much as I adore the dwarves, I don't think that they're one of the core civilizations of this region. They might be for elsewhere, and they could certainly have a shared progenitor. Again, it's the giants. The giants could be anywhere. I think that's kind of something we need to settle on. The dragons and the giants were at least a somewhat globe-spanning race. I really don't like the idea that the dragons and the giants were the heralds of, like, the ancient fallen civilization. No, if there's any ancient fallen civilization, it's the precursors. And I definitely need to come up with a better name for them than that. And in fact, in my older versions, they were the Solarians. Solnians. Solnians? Solarians. I don't remember what I called them. What would this be? This is in D&D. And then one of my ancient campaigns. You can see this. This is one of my first D&D campaigns I ever ran. And you can see Roshan. One of the races that existed in this setting. Arcturians were like the main human race. Solarian. It's these guys. They were the super magical ones. And then the Roshan, like earth elementals. Actually, that was one of the Roshan templates. Game of Thrones. Half humanoid, half not. They kind of looked more like that, though. Yeah, that was the closest. Lorian. Solar, Solar. There we go. No, go for it. Dustman. I'd like to stay, but I have to wake up in 5 hours. Fair enough. I like the idea of the dwarves being mostly travelling merchant caravans with some outposts dotted around. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So, the dwarves, for all intent and purposes, are off map. I'm not even sure that they'd necessarily be like a northern mountain range. They could certainly be like one of the mountain ranges separating this region from the rest of the world. Maybe the attacking greenskins, or possibly even the draconics, went around them because the mountains were too hard to get through. That's possible. Ever heard the theory that Atlantis was the Eye of Sahara? No. Maybe the dwarves can be like the Afghans, controlling a vital mountainous trade region. Yes, exactly that. I might even note that down. Let's put that here. So dwarves, more Incan in tradition. Control some Afghan like mountainous passes. And therefore controlling trade. Especially important for the Silk Road. And I do like the idea that we have some kind of like east-west travel. So even though like initially the draconic races are probably known about, but they're never really seen as a threat. Like they're people you trade with distantly. And it's only once they start arriving in big numbers because of whatever's pushing them out that they become relevant. Thank you. Toltec civilization, the forerunners of the Aztecs, can trace their origin back to Hidalgo. Believed to be pre-Columbian civilization, offset of the Teotihuacan civilization, another resident of the Mesoamerican area. Yeah, cool. Actual Dragon China. I hadn't really considered that this would turn into Dragon China. But yes, the Dragonborn would be China. Not a fan of the dragon trying to trick myself. Yeah, see... Neither. I don't see these being Chinese dragons. I see them being Western dragons. But then again, their place in the world and the fact that I do think that they would have an ancient civilization, it has parallels with China. And I like the idea that the Dragonborn are one of the oldest established civilizations. They're probably not in the same region as these guys. So we can have the Dwarves as the connector. Like, I don't want to get too dug into what the Dragonborn society is like. Dragonborn are important for the region we're talking about because of the Draconic invasions. So they would be on the fringes. They probably have settled in some way. Possibly in the ruins of the Hobgoblin realms. Dragons can be connected to myths and legends from almost every ancient civilization, almost every continent on Earth. Yeah, dragons are interesting like that. They are actually one of the few examples of, like, human imagination. Because pretty much every single civilization, regardless of where it arose, has dragons. So somehow they are, like, deeply buried in the human psyche. Let's not get into arguments about what's real and what's not. You know what, I'm going to put that under the Dragonborn area. After the Draconic incursion, the local Dragonborn settled in the ruins of the former Goblin realm. Kinda like the Ottomans. Settling in Byzantium, I mean. I think every ancient group of people had dragon theory or superstition. I mean, I'm sure more than one had stumbled across ancient dinosaur remains. Yeah, quite possibly. Really want the Goliaths and Dwarfs being in the same kingdoms, or at least in a long-standing alliance like the Netherlands and the English, or the English and the Portuguese. I mean, they're very much going to be related. Like, I really do see the, in this setting at least, the Dwarves and the Goliaths living close. I'm not exactly sure where the Goliaths would be, because I was kind of envision the Goliaths being like high mountain dwellers, and then the Dwarves being the foothills, but if we're going to have the dwarves as kind of the Incan civilization type thing, then the Goliaths would probably be on the foothills and the dwarves would be up in the mountains. Doesn't matter, that's something we can sort out when we actually start digging into these guys. And again, remember that this is just kind of the origin of each of these races. We then want them to be a bit of a melting pot and have them mix and merge throughout this region. All I'm doing here is saying, okay, this is the origin. This is when they enter the historical picture. Then they get mixed up. And I think the really good example of that is the Greenskins. They start as invaders, then they start settling, then they themselves are ousted by later invaders. These northern incursions probably don't even need to be hostile. Nah, we'll leave it as is. I just don't want to hang up too much on the Vikings. That's more of a self-note. Otherwise I will be turning into Dwarven Vikings. I really don't want to. Giants in the Amazon, dwarves are Incan. Now that's interesting, having the Goliaths being jungle dwellers. That puts them a lot further south, because most of the lands that I'm envisioning here is Europe. Like, this region that we're creating right now is Europe. If we're talking, like, average temperatures, fertility of the land, how close different peoples are. I am a European. I feel the most comfortable designing a European-centric world, but a European-alike world, and then spreading out from there. Like, the three civilizations, the humans, the elves, and the gnomes, would basically be England, Spain, and France. In fact, it'd be more like England, France, and Germany. An ancient super fantasy dystopia of everything mixing together and get behind this. Yeah, that's basically the plan here. Like, one thing I dislike about fantasy settings is when everything is so solidly fixated on race. It's like, these are the Dwarven realms, these are the human realms, these are the Elven realms. I mean, sure, the origins of those might be one race-centric. There might be some areas that still are, but particularly in the border regions between them, you would get hybrid civilizations. And I really want to get behind the idea. I mean, I'm really beginning to see the hobgoblins here as kind of the Visigoths. At first, they're from somewhere out in the Russian steppe. Then they appear in the Balkans, cause a bit of havoc, sack Rome, take over northern Italy, decide, yeah, I don't like it here, and end up eventually in Spain. And it's that kind of mixture that I want to get here. Giants could be more forest creatures than jungle, since temperate forest could be much more fitting for Europe originally was before being heavily developed like humans. We need to settle on what giants are. And dragons. Like, we need to work out that prehistory thing. Or not. We can just say they existed once and they don't seem to anymore. Giants could be somewhere else. Or are you saying Goliaths? Dwarves could be good Switzerland. Trade money, the bank. I definitely see the dwarves as controlling, like, mountain passes, and those mountain passes being important. For sure. The dwarves might even have ousted the gnomes from some of their old mountain retreats. Push the gnomes to be more on flatter terrain. Might be why the gnomes are more maritime. So maybe the gnomes originated in what we would consider to be Switzerland, which is where the magical disaster was. And then they get pushed out by all of the others and end up in, like, the Netherlands. Actually, I kind of like that idea. Let's say that the gnomes. So their home immediately following the magical disaster was like Switzerland, but they get pushed out of that region by all of the others and end up in a swamp, which they drain. Dragons and giants could be very diminished, perhaps a severe drop of fertility for some reason. Yeah, we'll need to work something out for those. Like, I do definitely think that dragons and giants should be near mythical. I think there should be a reason why the Dragonborn effectively took over from the dragons. Most likely that they're just very rare. Like, dragons in D&D, honestly, I'd kind of leave unchanged. I really like the way the dragons function. They're rare, they have different ages. The age is the thing that matters the most to determine a dragon's power, along with their wealth. Like, there's very little about that I want to change. And then the other thing which I like about dragons is the fact that they can change the environment around them. So we could have, like, a glacier in the middle of a plains, just because a white dragon decided to settle there. Or a glacier in the middle of the desert. Ooh, you know what? That's actually kind of cool. So, glacier in the middle of a desert. The ice irrigates the fringes, and people have settled there. Frozen Oasis. That's a cool name. That's definitely happening. Might have been a coalition of the dragons and the giants that kicked the mortal gods off of the world. See, that's the kind of power I imagine those early dragons and giants having. And I kind of like the idea that they worked together more than they were just completely opposed. And then the giants could have been the precursor to the three civilizations. Do I want the giants to be the precursor race? No, not really. Why would they change in size so much? I also don't want most of the giants' homeland to be wiped out by the massive explosion. I want the giants to be in an area that's explorable. What if giants are merely a very rare mutation of Goliaths and Dwarves? That might be the case now. Like, giants definitely exist, and the thing you need to consider with the giants is there are hill giants, there are mountain giants, there are fire giants, there are... what are they called? Cloud giants. There are different types, and I don't want to get too far away from that. What are the dragons of the pinnacle of nature? And they fought the giants who created simple civilization. They fought for these concepts on divine conceptual level. The dragons destroyed first giant civilization, but civilization prevailed and the dragons technically lost. I mean, that's actually kind of interesting. Like, the green dragon was the pinnacle of the jungle. White dragon was the pinnacle of the mountain. I mean, that could certainly be like one of the stories of mythology. Not even pinnacle, but like avatar. Avatars of nature, there we go. Which is why they favour those certain terrain types. Like blue dragons you tend to find in the desert, gold dragons you tend to find on the coast. Which actually kind of makes an interesting point, because silver dragons, the ones most interested in civilization, they might have been the betrayer dragons. First ruler, even creator. Because that makes the Platinum Dragon interesting. He's not just a goody two-shoes. Oh, look at me, I'm Bahamut, I can do no ill. The Goliaths could live at the frozen Oasis. Goliaths in the desert, though? Maybe. What about the giants being the creations of the gods, tasked with creating the races, and they would in the world themselves by the gods? Once they turned against the gods, those powers were rescinded. I don't know that I want the gods to necessarily get that involved. I think my problem with this is the gods kind of feel like, in our setting, where worship is so important, how can you have gods with no worshippers? The whole point here is the rise and fall of divine power is dependent on the number of worshippers they have. What if there are no worshippers? Where do they come from? It kind of feels like before the gods there was magic. Magic made the gods. The gods were the first manifestation of magic. Maybe even the giants dreamed them up. They're a big race, they have a big imagination. I quite like that idea, actually. Giants were the first to harness magic. They dreamed up the gods, who in turn taught them how to use magic themselves. Well, actually, no. This goes even deeper, because it is thought that the first big human settlements were clerical locations. Like the first proper settlements in England were actually up in Orkney because it was a very religiously important area. And that's because the clergy were the ones who were being given resources by the people, so they were the ones with the time to create a bureaucracy. So the giants could fulfill that role here. So the giants were the first to harness magic. They dreamed up the gods, who in turn taught them civilization. This put them at odds with the dragons. Which kind of begs the question, why didn't the dragons dream up the gods? Maybe they just didn't have... Maybe we just leave that as one of the big unanswered questions. There is a place for big unanswered questions. I like this, though. This gives us the reason to have the dragons and the giants in the same place. And gives us that origin of where civilization was. So the giants were kind of the precursor to the precursors. At least like the cloud giants. Oh, heck. What if they were the precursors? We're talking millennia here, maybe even more. We're talking the giants, the dragons being around in the age of the dinosaurs. Then the Neanderthals are the giants. The first Homo sapiens were the precursors, the offshoot of the giants. What if most of the giants are still sleeping endlessly? I think that the giants just kind of forgot themselves. I think that the highest... Well, I don't want to say the best of, but the best of the giants became the precursors. And part of living so much closer together in society meant that they couldn't be as big, because there just weren't enough resources to go around. Giants had to get smaller when living together in closer-knit societies. There just were not enough resources. So basically, social Darwinism, those who were too big, used up too many resources, got ousted. Bigger giants would be titans. Yeah, effectively. So we still have like the outcast giants, the ones who didn't settle themselves into these societies, which are the modern giants. Outcast giants, those who did not form societies, are the modern giants. Would the Goliaths be the natural precursors then? No. Giants are probably still an offshoot of... Sorry, Goliaths are still an offshoot of the giants. But again, I want the precursors to be something else. We're going to need to come up with a name for them. But they would also be one of the offshoots. So maybe giants lead to precursor. And they lead to Goliaths. They lead to Dwarves. Random question. It's random. That's very random, Katie. What colour is my hair? It's mousy blonde, I've heard it referred to. Would I want to be from Norway or England? Hard to say, actually. That's a difficult decision. Like, if it was Denmark or Sweden, I'd probably say Denmark or Sweden rather than England. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Completely irrelevant. Who would be the offshoot of the dragons? Offshoot of the dragons are Dragonborn and Kobolds. And we haven't even said anything about Kobolds or Goblins. Kobolds. In fact, I mean, the thing with the Dragonborn and the Kobolds, these are both races that learn to live in societies as well. So, whereas the precursors of the Goliaths and Dwarves are kind of giants reformed by society, Kobolds and Dragonborn are dragons reformed by society. Lizard folk? No, I think lizard folk would be something different. I mean, one of the things I do quite like are races related to animals. So, like, you have Bjornar creatures, which are sentient bears. You have sentient... Oh, what are they called? Those cat creatures. You've got... What are the ravens? They're really interesting. The ones who can't actually think for themselves, they can only mimic. Tabaxi is the cats, yep, that's right. Any races intended to be elevated from fauna? Probably not. There might be something like a treant, but it wouldn't be like a major race. So the fauna races is probably the type of thing you would find in our form of the Feywild. Kenku, that's the one. Sentient golems given life through some kind of nexus or crystal. Those are the Roshan. So basically, magic which finds sentience becomes elementals. Or Roshan. Roshan are the most civilized of those. They're the least volatile. Which is a homebrew race. Which we'll be introducing. But their origins are a lot more uncertain. They're kind of like Warforged. They're created by somebody. But nobody knows who. Yeah, we talked about them at the beginning of the stream. Anyway, I've been going for 40 minutes longer than I'd actually intended to go, so I think I'm going to call this one here. This has been, again, a really good stream. Got loads and loads of stuff sorted. So I'm just going to do copy-paste, because it always makes me really nervous that there is no save button here. But if I just click on something else and then go back to races, they are still there. It does get automatically saved. So that has been stored. I love the fact that we have a very basic timeline. I had not actually expected we would get that. I love the fact that we've got this idea of the dragons and the giants and where they came from. Oops. That makes me very happy. And we've also got like the vague outline of where the different races first appear in our region. And one of the things I did kind of want to start doing today was creating a map. But this gives us a much better idea of like how the basics of that map should look. And then once we start creating the map and saying, okay, these are the start points of the different races, that's when we can kind of run simulation experiments to then start mixing it all up. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this, then please do consider hitting that follow button. We're going to be doing this every Wednesday from now on. Same deal as before. So basically we play Ambanar for about 3 hours. Then for the last hour of the stream, which is usually a 4-hour stream, we do world building. And I want to continue doing this. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's really interesting. And I want to get in and flesh it out and make it more interesting. If you want to support the channel, everything I do, then please do consider checking out my Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/MordredViking, or you can also subscribe here on Twitch. I do DM a game of Dungeons & Dragons. We're currently playing through Icewind Dale. That's on Sundays, although we're currently on a 3-week hiatus because of Christmas stuff. So expect that to return the 2nd of January next year. So 2nd of January 2022, which already feels kind of scary saying that, but it is. I'm also in a game myself playing as Zep Skyspan, who is a gnomish artificer. That is on Mondays, which is also now on hiatus thanks to Christmas stuff. But there is actually quite a lot of Dungeons & Dragons things. The game that I DM is on twitch.tv/DigitalDragonsGM, and the game that I'm playing in is twitch.tv/ComponentCastLive. So 2 different channels for that outside of this Mordred Viking one. Otherwise, I play lots of strategy games like European Universalis, Hearts of Iron, Myth of Empires most recently, and a whole bunch of other things, so I do hope you'll come and join us for that. And actually, speaking of mythological things, we have actually got... when is that? Oh, it's tomorrow, 5 PM. We're going to be playing Total War Troy with the new Oasis and Memnon DLC. So if you want to see more of the mythical stuff, especially with the introduction of Egypt, or technically Ethiopia, but it's really Egypt, into Total War Troy, then that is going to be on preview tomorrow, 5 PM GMT. So I do hope you'll come and join me for that. Then after that is going to be at 10 PM is Hearts of Iron 4, continuing the American Red Alert scenario. I don't know that I'll necessarily go all the way through to 2 AM because I've got an early start on Friday because I'm flying out to Stockholm, so that I can be around for the European Universalis 4 Grandest Land, which I'm going to be commentating on part of, and also just in the background running a lot of the social media stuff. That's going to be on Saturday and Sunday, so loads of stuff coming up this weekend. No streams on Friday and probably no streams on Monday either. Anyway, that's it for me for now. Thank you everyone for watching. I think it's CC. Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. I will see you all soon. Hope you enjoyed this. Until next time. Bye bye.